My name is Karen Fleshman, and I'm the founder of Racy Conversations. Our mission is to inspire the first anti-racist generation in America.
Our guest for today's broadcast, I think folks back in December started making recommendations. They saw a very popular post at Huffington Post. It was titled, "Dear Black Folks, a Letter from a White Woman." This was kind of late December 2015, and just going over many of the really ugly illustrations of racism, white supremacy over the past year and a half or so, with the non-indictment Darren Wilson killer of Michael Brown, and the Trayvon Martin murder, and Renisha McBride, and Daniel Holtzclaw, just the whole list of atrocities. But she wrote this letter, and I think a lot of folks saw it, at least a lot of our listeners saw it, and were like, wow, you should get this white woman on the program and see, she'd be willing to be honest, have some candid, constructive dialogue with us about this letter and just her views on racism. Contacted her. She was willing to hang out with us for a bit, and it just happens. I think I made an error in the scheduling originally, and so we compromised and moved it a week ahead, and it just happened to be on the MLK holiday, which is fitting. She, in addition to writing a lot of different pieces that are published at Huffington Post, you can also just go to her website, and you can see a lot of other reports that she has authored outside of Huffington Post material. And it's just her name, KarenFleshman.com. Should be linked in the description, KarenFleshman.com. You can click on the tab that says Writing, and it'll pull up all of her different articles. We'll talk about some of the different ones today. She has another one, White People, Let's Make 2016 the Year We Get Better at Diversity, and that's published at LinkedIn. In addition to being a writer, she is a race educator. She does speaking engagements, goes out, talks to different folks to try to give information, her view on racism, white supremacy, what it is, and what we should be doing to try to solve this problem. She also went to law school. Real pleasure to have her on the program, joining us live from the Bay Area, Miss Karen Fleshman. Miss Fleshman, you're with us?
Yes, I am, Gus. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who's listening in. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. We're also appreciative of your time. Anything that you think it would be important for listeners to know about you? I'm sure we have a significant number of people who haven't read your material as of yet. But anything you think it would be important for them to know about who you are and the work you do before we get started?
What is important to know is that I'm really trying to reach as many well-intentioned white people as possible and help them to understand our role in replicating white supremacy and what we can do to stop replicating it, and to work alongside with our brothers and sisters to dismantle systemic racism. I think it starts by working on ourselves, and then working on our relationships with people of color, and then we can work together to dismantle systemic racism. And I think without all three steps in that process, I think all three of them are needed to make the kind of change we need.
Okay. I think I've already said it. You have it in the title for many of your reports, but I'd just like to make sure everyone's clear. You are a white woman, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I am not at all ashamed of my heritage. I'm actually, very comfortable and proud of my family. I come from a long line of people who have been committed to public service. I was just at a dinner on Saturday night for my mother's cousin, and seated around the table were immigration specialists, someone who does anti-discrimination investigations, someone who does wage and hour litigation, largely on behalf of low-income workers. And these were fairly distant relatives of mine. It was the first time I'd ever met them. And I just really was struck by how I'm so blessed to be part of a family that has really fought for rights and really believes in taking a stand and committing our life to service. And that has been very much a part of my life as well.
Right on, right on. Okay. We will see if we can cover as much material as possible in the time that we have you for the program this evening. We try to begin our broadcasts that you will appreciate as someone who has practiced law. Definitions are very important, terms and definitions, particularly when discussing racism, white supremacy. I begin our programs, my definition of white supremacy and racism. I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that is an accurate definition?
I think it is accurate, but I do think there are a great number of white people who are subjugating other people unconsciously, or who are not, I don't think they're aware exactly of how their behavior is impacting others, and I don't think that they are, how can I put it? I mean, yes, I definitely think that white people intentionally harm other people, but I also think on some level people are doing it on a very subconscious level, or they are just what I call participating in naturally occurring all-white social circles. So it's not that they intentionally decided to only associate with other white people and maybe a few Asian people. It's just that the way our society is so segregated, it's very easy as a white person to just fall into those kinds of relationships, and then through those relationships replicate white supremacy by, sharing social capital and those types of things, even though when you were forming those relationships, it wasn't that you were necessarily intentionally excluding anyone, but it just kind of worked out that way. I find that a lot in the social circles that I participate in. And so, I try to bring it up when we're at the barbecue or the kid's birthday or whatever, and I look around and I don't see any people of color there, that, like, guys, I hate to be the downer here, but do you realize that we are actually replicating systemic racism just as we stand here and chat and, drink a couple beers together? That we as white people, racism is so insidious. It's in the air that we breathe. It's in everything that we do. So unless and until we start to look around and see that, take notice of it, and then realize it is a problem and actively go against it, we are continuously replicating it, even in the absence, I think, at some level of intentionality. Does that make sense to you, Gus?
Let's see, but before I give my response, it would be great. I definitely want you to give us a comprehensive response. You've done a lot of research on this. You're a race educator. I definitely want a full-fledged response. But it's been my experience a lot of times in conversations on racism, white supremacy, particularly with white people, they will give very long-winded answers. Malcolm X, he used the term pussyfooting, where we're not really get right to the point. Let's be clear as possible. And that way it gives us more time to cover as much material as possible. With that request aside, my response and trying to be right to the point, I hear that frequently. Pretty much a restatement of what you just said. It might be different terms may be employed, but it's pretty much the same stance that many white people are not aware, they're ignorant, they're not conscious, they do these things, but it's not deliberately done. And my view, that is total hogwash. And most of the time, if it's a white person who's making that view, it's my opinion that they're probably deliberately practicing racism and giving a knowingly false response. The program that we're doing next on Wednesday, Kristen Green, who is also a white woman, she's talking about Prince Edward County in Virginia when they closed their public schools for 5 years as opposed to going to school with black children, and stated so explicitly. That is not something that was unintentional. That was not something that white people didn't know what they were doing. They went about the business for years of planning that we will close public schools in Prince Edward County before we allow one black child to attend school with us. And this is not a relic of the 1960s. Hannah Nicole Jones has great work showing that right now, 21st century, schools are just as segregated, quote unquote, as they were 50 years ago. Even a professor at Emory University has a great report that's published that showed that white people, they did a study, and white people overwhelmingly have no interest in living around black people, even if all the amenities were the same, great schools, no crime, high property values, all the things that you would want to have in a neighborhood where you own property. Just the presence of a significant portion of black people. It wasn't even a majority. It wasn't like you're in, 80% black neighborhood. Just a significant portion of black people is enough for white people to say, no way. I think there's way too much evidence in this system that white people are very aware. In fact, I take the opinion, if you're a white person, you cannot be ignorant about racism. So that particular portion of the response, I don't think it's accurate. I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests it's not accurate, and I think that's just one of the ways that racism, white supremacy gets practiced, this notion that white people do all of this, dominating and terrorizing the whole planet of non-white people. They do all this by accident. The air is racist, not white people. The report, the Dear Black Folks, this letter from a white woman that you wrote, there's a particular paragraph where, to me, it's like I've seen this sort of thing before. Tim Wise and Jane Elliott, Dr. Becky McIntosh, they've all been on the program. And there are many other white people who have written things like this where they honestly acknowledge racism, white supremacy. Some of these folks have written whole books where they acknowledge racism, white supremacy. Kristen Green coming on the program on Wednesday where she's talking about her grandfather was one of the architects of closing the schools down and keeping a whole county of black children from being able to get public education for 5 years, a half a decade, and did this deliberately and with a smile, gleefully, and with no regrets in most cases. But you wrote, I hope that in 2016 more white people will sit down for a cup of coffee or meal with you, meaning black people, invite you into our homes and visit you in yours. I hope that white people will humbly ask for your feedback about what we could do better. Then when we do, you are honest and don't hold back. And I hope white people will apply your guidance. And just that paragraph kind of stuck out to me. As I said, I'm of the opinion that white people are not ignorant. They do not need remedial racism or racism for dummies from black people, but just the whole notion of white people and non-white people, victims of white supremacy, sitting down for a cup of coffee, a la the Starbucks race talk campaign that they did at the beginning of last year, I think, for maybe 3 days and then scrapped it. I'm struggling to even find the correct word. Pitiful. I think that's in the ballpark. That is going to forge some sort of solution. And again, I just come back to white people have made this very clear in mass. This is as a collective. White people have made this pretty clear that they are not interested in going out of the business of practicing racism, white supremacy, that they might be willing to come hang out for 5 minutes and have a cup of coffee and chit chat or whatever. It seems many of them are not even willing to do that, but they might be willing to do that. But in terms of dismantling this system of terrorism against non-white people, I've just seen no evidence that white people are voluntarily willing to do this. And I suspect you as a white woman and a very educated white woman, I suspect you know this better than I do. When I see something like that, it just seems like a white person just really having fun practicing racism and clowning a lot of black people. Like, that's the way it read to me. Would you like to respond?
So you think it's clowning white people, or you think it's clowning black people to suggest that we need to sit down with one another and develop stronger interpersonal relationships with one another?
Absolutely. If we're talking about the system of white supremacy, and that is the proposed solution from a white woman who's graduated from law school and all the other educational experiences that you have, professional experiences, networking that you've done in doing immigrants' rights, to think that this problem is going to be small, that this is going to make any impact at all, to have us go and hang out at Starbucks for 30 minutes. I mean, that is total nonsense. Like, how is that in any way, shape, form going to impact the problem that you mentioned about black people not having employment in New York?
For example, that's how most people get their jobs. Every job I've ever had, I've been called and said, "Hey, Karen, we want you to come work here," by somebody that I know. So I think this exactly goes to the issue of why we face so much racial inequality in the workplace, because people don't know each other, so they don't have access to these different career opportunities.
That is totally false. That is totally, and that's what I mean. Where it's like I'm not talking to a white woman who is ignorant. Forgive, but I mean, okay. You graduated from law school. You're not. You're a very informed white woman. The problem is not that we don't, quote unquote, know each other. If we were having this conversation, 300 years ago during plantation white supremacy, you can't say that Thomas Jefferson doesn't know Sally Hemings. That is a lie. I do know this person. I am just dedicated to abusing and terrorizing this person. That power dynamic is still in effect. That is the problem, not that white people and black people don't know each other. I have seen way too much evidence that white people and black people can hang out, have coffee, have sex, dance, all of that. I know you know me, you know my children. That has done nothing to eradicate this power dynamic. That has done nothing to say that I'm going to now start hiring mass numbers of black people to drop those unemployment numbers in New York or any of the other places where you have the same type of statistics. It's just folly. And again, I'm talking to a white person where my suspicion is that you know this. You know this better than I do.
Well, I mean, statistically, I don't have the citation right here, but the majority of hires are done through interpersonal networks.
Totally understand all that. Because you're just saying the same thing over and over again. I totally understand that. The golf course, yes. Okay. Most of the hiring, it doesn't come from the paper. Most of these are internal hires. White people are not going to give that up to begin including black people. That's what I'm saying is the point. Not that, somehow if we just can mush white people and black people together, that will resolve that problem. No, I'm saying that white people have deliberately set that type of system up, and they have every intention of keeping that in place, and there's large evidence that would suggest that that's true. That's what I'm saying. To just keep going back and saying that that's where the hiring comes from, I know all that. All of that is the system of white supremacy that I've seen no evidence that white people are going to discontinue voluntarily.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and but that's why I think that the way we move forward as white people, the way that we can understand how racism operates and stop replicating it, involves three things: working on ourselves, working on our interpersonal relationships, broadening our social networks, so that we can understand how racism replicates, so that we can understand the nuances of our behavior that is causing this to replicate. I mean, I can't counsel for every single situation, but people have to listen and authentically understand what they are doing wrong, and then they can start to change their behavior, and then we can work on dismantling systemic racism side by side. Then how do you think that white supremacy ever ends?
I think,
if you think that white people have no interest in ending white supremacy, and it's going to go on forever and ever?
I never said it's going to go on forever and ever. There would be no point in doing this program or anything else related to racism if it's going to go on forever and ever. I would, go find something else to do with my time. I'd go protest or watch, the basketball game or whatever else. The first step is to get honest information. That is number one towards solving any problem. Accurate information is number one. Accurate information, in my view, is all this nonsense about we need to hang out and sit down together and have a cup of coffee. That is total folly. Understanding that white people are dedicated. They're not ignorant because, again, you just said it again. White people don't understand. They're ignorant. They're not aware.
I was also very profoundly affected. I grew up in an entirely white community. Okay. My town was a sundown town, meaning a town where people of color could not rent, could not own, could not stay in a hotel. They had to be out of the town by sundown. And when I talk to people about this, they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there were sundown towns all across the United States. In the warmth of other suns, one of the characters moves from Louisiana to Los Angeles and has to drive the entire journey in one drive because he cannot stay in a hotel anywhere along the interstate. And this is not ancient history. This is, the very recent history in our times.
That is hogwash. White people cannot be ignorant about racism. If you are white and you are making errors in what you're doing or saying with regards to racism, other white people will correct you. They will be the first ones to step up and let you know that you've made an error, that you don't have some information. We need to catch you up to speed. You missed a memo or something. This is what you're supposed to be doing as a white woman. This is what you're supposed to be doing as a white man. This is what you're supposed to be doing as a white child. We've had tons of white people even come on and talk about how they started to get these lessons about what they are supposed to do, what is expected of them as a white person when they were a child, 5, 4, 3, even younger than that in some instances. I think that's starting number one, as opposed to coming to this and thinking that the problem is that white people are ignorant and that there needs to be a sizable amount of energy, really any energy, dedicated towards informing, educating, clearing up confusion that white people have that is causing them to practice tremendous aggression and terrorism against non-white people. That is not the result of ignorance. That is a result of devotion, dedication to maintaining white power over non-white people. There was one other question I wanted to make sure I got in about your essay. Some of the people that read it, I guess they took the opinion that you were writing it because you said that fear of black males and this violence and aggression towards black males, that you were presenting it as though black females were kind of collateral damage to racism, white supremacy, and some folks took major issue with that. Could you respond to the people who said that you did not present it as black females are equal victims in the system of racism, white supremacy?
Yes, I completely hear that, and that was a huge error of omission on my part. I did not mean to make it seem that the only way that black women suffer is as a result of the collateral damage of our fear of black men. And I understand how reading the letter, the way that I framed it that way, makes it sound that I don't recognize that. I do recognize that. And I also, another terrible omission is I should have recognized the pain and suffering of black LGBT people who are, extremely vulnerable and suffer in a whole other way. So if I were to write the letter again, I would definitely make those points much clearer.
That was 2. And I think we nabbed everybody who dialed in with a question. Finally, good to have lots of audience participation. I do definitely encourage folks to get better at asking asking white people, suspected racists, asking them questions. Before you depart, if you wanted to give a final word, I think you heard a lot from people who called in terms of questioning and suspicion around this notion of white ignorance, as well as some of your other responses, even you personally, how you practice racism, white supremacy, just based on a lot of the responses that you gave, particularly in some of the answers deviating very far afield from the question, which I've prompted about several times during the course of the conversation, as well as several of the callers. Have to get in my sound effect.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of work.
Based on that, as well as the letters and what have you that I wrote, I would just affirm what I said, that your presentation does not strike me as someone who is sincerely, authentically going about the business of ending white supremacy. To me, it just sounds very much like niche work for a white person where they can make money and, eventually if you want to sell books or whatever else you're doing because you're already writing essays and what have you, where they can make money. It gives the appearance that there are some quote-unquote good white people who are trying to solve this problem, which is a very powerful idea in terms of confusing non-white people.
You're incredible, honestly. So, you were kind of what, hopefully this isn't offensive, but what, the mindset of what white people really need, that we should, they should really strive for, that mindset of just, forget about that idea of that superiority or that kind of complex or those types of things of the past. It's time to start inclusion. It's time to start making this even plain that it has always really has been, because we are all still human beings, but that we've neglected to be aware of. And I love you, honestly. You are so awesome. And I just really appreciate that you're alive.
I love you, woman.
Evidenced by the support and glowing responses that you got from a lot of black people for the letter that you wrote. But nothing about it strikes me as this is a person who is sincerely trying to go about the business of ending racism. To me, as I said earlier, it just sounds like it would maybe refine the way that some white people practice racism so they don't say maybe nigger jokes or these type of things, so they get better about conducting themselves around non-white people where they are not perceived as racist. But nothing about this strikes me as authentic work against racism. Just the honesty, in fact, is so lacking in terms of insisting that white people are ignorant. That alone would be enough. But that, in combination with the long-winded responses and the overall message that I got from your letters and writing and what have you, it just doesn't strike me as authentic work against racism, even though I do appreciate you hanging out and taking all our calls. Did you want to respond to that and give a final thought before you exit?
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate your feedback. I would love, I'm a little bit exhausted now from this long conversation, but I would appreciate perhaps you and I could have a follow-up conversation, and you could walk me through your reasoning there, because I am a very sincere and authentic person. That is my core values, and I want to be doing this work right, and I want to be accountable to people of color, and you are clearly someone who has studied this long and hard, so I really want us to engage in dialogue so I can learn from you and get better at what I'm doing. And I appreciate all the people who listened and called in with their questions. It was very educational for me, and I'm so glad to be walking on this journey together.
Karen Fleshman, you can go to the website. You can see the article that we talked about today and some of the other pieces that she's written about racism. It's just her name, KarenFleshman.com, and then you'll see the tabs and all that. She even has contact information if you want to send her an email based on what you heard during the program. I know we have Bay Area listeners. They might want to get in touch, do the coffee thing, and meet up in person and give you some feedback. Thank you again for being on the program. It was a hoot. We will be in touch. Hopefully we can even have you back on the program in the future if other folks had questions. But enjoy the rest of your evening. We will definitely be in touch, Ms. Fleshman.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you all. Bye now.
Good evening. Evening. Context of white supremacy. Wow, that was rigorous. 3 hours of questioning. Glad that so many people got an opportunity to get their question in. Again, as I always say, we should all be trying to get better at asking questions, particularly asking questions of white people about racism, white supremacy. And I definitely think it's important to be mindful that your question may not be answered. Very, very important to remain alert for that. I think folks did a pretty good job of that today, and staying courteous even when you're calling them out for suspected racist behavior.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think she was probably the most boring suspected racist that I've heard so far. I think she's worse than Grimsley. At least he could answer something. I felt like it, very boring and awful. Anyways, I'll mute my line.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
This is Mr. Blue from New York. I believe that she was practicing racism all throughout the interview. She used buckets and buckets of words to continually try to confuse the direct questions that the callers were asking, and her continual standpoint that white people are ignorant after saying that she was taught about her white supremacy and her white power at a very early age, that white people were fearful of retaliatory violence against black people. Everything that she said was an absolute contradiction to everything, and I believe she was practicing racism at every point. I'll mute my line. Thank you, Gus.
Oh, it's really brief. I was saying I found it fascinating that when she was answering questions, she kept referring to white people as they instead of we, which is that psychological attachment to black people. So again, I agree with the previous caller. She was definitely practicing racism throughout the interview, simply by the fact that she would not refer to herself as white. She separated herself by saying they instead of saying we. And it was basically a way of making herself look like a quote-unquote good white person. I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Dear Allison and all white women, I'm writing you because I am you, and I'm worried about us. I'm confounded that 53% of us voted for a pussy grabber endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. 45 was the preferred candidate of white women in every age group except millennials.
You can hide all you want. The whole world gonna see you, boo.
I'm profoundly disturbed, but not surprised, by the spate of white college-educated women calling the police on people of color for absurd reasons.
Basically, people who know me well, they're like, don't talk about racism, because like I will talk about racism, like I can talk about it, 24 hours a day. I would gladly talk about nothing other than racism.
I see a lot of your blogs on your website as well. It's a long list. I love it. And then some of the places that you've written, I just love it.
Thank you. Yeah. What has to change is we have to get to know each other. And what we can't just get to know each other and, like you said, not take accountability for the past. We can't just get to know each other and be like, oh, that was a long time ago, and that didn't have anything to do with me. Baloney. It didn't have anything to do with us. It has everything to do with us and the way that we live right now. And we have to recognize that. I don't feel guilty about being white. I'm not ashamed of being white. It is what it is. And in fact, I really love my white family. I love white people. I have many white people in my life who are really wondering. White people are not bad.
Right.
I just think that we are extremely delusional about reality. And when we get clear on reality and when we build relationships across difference, that is what is going to transform our society. As I like to say, this is the year 50 years ago, Dr. King was assassinated. If it were enough to change the laws to ban discrimination, we would not be in this situation that we are in right now. What we have to do is change this and seeing the truth and knowing what the truth is and being really clear on all of this stuff is going to free all of us. And it's going to allow us to create the kind of society that we want for ourselves and for our children.
Please, white women, let Permit Patty be the last white woman who calls the cops on a person of color. Pay attention. Change. Sincerely, Karen Fleshman.
In terms of who is most open to my message, certainly people of color. It breaks my heart, but when companies hire me and make the workshops optional, almost everybody who comes to the workshop are people of color.